Just so everybody knows, we are here to celebrate Mom and Dad's 65th wedding anniversary, which was actually December 10th, and thought it would be a fun idea if Mom and Dad talked a little bit about how they met. Should we have Mom go first, or you want Dad to go first?
I'll go first because I'm shorter.
Okay.
We met at Patuxent River.
Oh, make sure there's people behind you, Mom, so make sure everybody can hear.
We met at Patuxent River Naval Air Station at 4 a.m. in the morning for a flight to Argentia, Newfoundland. And I had, with my two corpsmen, had placed my nursing bag, which was a footlocker, with all sorts of things in it, and you know, all kinds of narcotics, on the plane at the night before. We went about 4 or 5 to put it on. And then the plane was then parked on the runway, and the doors were open all night. I mean, that would never do now.
With
but
narcotics,
at that time it did. So we met that morning for the flight to Argentia, Newfoundland, which was a naval base there. I was going to pick up some patients that were to be brought back to Bethesda Naval Hospital. We offloaded them in Patuxent and then took them by ambulance to Bethesda Naval. So when I first met him and he asked me out for a date then, I said, go home to your wife and 5 kids. Because it had been my experience that all of the reserves that came back for active duty were married, and I was positive that this was another married man. In the beginning, I didn't think that married men would ask single girls for dates, but I was a little naive. I was a little naive. So, Greta von Southern, who worked in personnel, said, Nita, you can date him. He is not married. He lives with his parents in an apartment in New York City. So I said, okay. And he took me to Washington, D.C. I've forgotten the name of the restaurant, to have a very special dinner. And of course, in Northwest Texas, the steaks were chicken fried steaks, and I thought they were very good. That was not quite what my husband liked. He didn't think that much of them. He wanted a regular steak. So at any rate, we had a very nice time, and then he proposed after about 3 or 4 days. Oh my goodness! and I was
decisive.
So I wasn't quite sure, because I was dating somebody back in Texas, that I was going to stay in the Navy 20 years and go marry him after
20 years in the
After 20
Navy.
years?
Yeah, or maybe I'd marry him after 12 years in the Navy and just still stay in, because my plan was to stay in the Navy. I liked it very much. But it didn't work out that way.
All right, so Dad, your turn.
Well, I enjoyed listening to my wonderful wife's recitation. It's okay. In the summer of 1949,
July of 49.
I was looking for a cheap vacation because those Wall Street law firms, although they held out the hope of becoming a junior partner after 7 or 8 or 10 years of working a 60 or 70 hour week, they did not pay much in the way of salary while you were still an associate. And I knew I could get an inexpensive vacation if I telephoned a man in the Navy Department that I had gotten to know during the war, and he got me a set of 2 weeks' orders I can't remember whether I got them with pay or without pay, but 2 weeks at the Naval Air Station in Patuxent River, which has a lot of attractive recreational facilities either on the base or nearby. You know, wonderful fishing, golf, etc., a good officers club and so forth. And during those 2 weeks, I was really at liberty to do whatever I felt like doing, except for one overnight trip on a regular Navy transport plane from Pax River to Newfoundland and back. And the day before I was scheduled for that flight, naturally, I was given a sheet of paper. It might have been called Plan of the Day or some such thing, which listed everybody in the plane crew of this Navy transport. You know, pilot, co-pilot, certain enlisted personnel. And I noticed 2 names one of which clearly sounded female, Helen. The other one, Nita, was not such a common name, and I wasn't quite sure. And I said, well, this is not like the Navy that I was in World War II. And this thing said that, and they listed me as a member of the crew, but entitled me or called me, not, you know, plane commander or co-pilot or whatever. They simply called me the observer. Well, I really had no fixed duties at all, but I observed. And it did very explicitly say everybody on that crew had to show up at the terminal, the air transportation terminal building
2 hours.
at Patuxent River by 4 a.m. of the day of the flight. So I was there promptly by 4 a.m. And a few minutes later, a Navy nurse entered the room, and she struck me as the most beautiful woman I had ever seen in my life.
Hear, hear.
And the only thing I could think of to do was to ask her if I could get her some breakfast, because in the corner of this room in the terminal for aircrew personnel, there was a
Breezy.
little facility for preparing food. So I'm glad she said yes and got the breakfast. And my wife tells me that during the entire flight, I kept staring at her.
And I kept thinking,
And,
it's my slip showing,
when
but I
we-
didn't put a skirt on, pants on, so I knew it wasn't.
Got there, we had a little spare time. One thing to do was to buy liquor, which was remarkably cheap compared to U.S. prices. And also there was entertainment, which included amateur boxing, which neither one of us was especially
And my
fond
little
of.
corpsman
but-
was one of the boxers, and I didn't like that at all. He got
Yeah,
hit in the
she didn't
face.
like to see her hospital corpsman beaten up in a boxing match. And the third thing, of course, was dinner. And I ordered lobster, which I'd always been fond of. And I think my wife had lobster for the first time at that dinner.
Naturally.
So,
Seafood was not big in Northwest.
the next day, we flew back from Argentia to Patuxent River. Neita took these sick or injured patients and saw that they got taken to the Navy hospital. And that apparently brought us up to either a weekend or a day off for flight cruise. And to the best of my memory, I asked her if she would join me to spend a day in Washington, D.C. I think she mentioned the restaurant. The name was La Salle du Bois. It was a French restaurant, and I wish it was still in business because it was really wonderful food and delightful in every way. And then, and this was of course in the summertime weather, we took a stroll near the tidal basin, which gives you a good view of the Lincoln Memorial at one end and the Capitol at the other end. And that is where I proposed to her after having just met her 3 days earlier. She kept me waiting for 10 days.
Who's counting? Who is counting?
Before she said yes. And we agreed that she would stay in the Navy because
I owed
she
the
felt
time.
she owed the Navy a certain amount of service when they had sort of upgraded her by, after she had become a Navy nurse, a commissioned officer. As you probably know, a Navy ensign is at the same level as an Army second lieutenant. Later on, she was promoted to what in Navy slang is called a JG, which is short for Lieutenant Junior grade. But I'm digressing, and I have to be careful because to inflict my long-windedness on all you wonderful people may become a crime. I don't know. Anyway, after 10 days, thank God, she said yes, and we continued seeing each other usually on weekends. I would fly from New York to Washington. This was before the interstate highway program. It wasn't practical to drive on a weekend between New York and Washington by car because the trip took 8 hours each way. But I would jump on a American Airlines plane at LaGuardia Field and get to Washington in about an hour or so. And one of the things that I remember about doing that for quite a number of weeks, actually, several months, that if I wanted to pass the time and it was a nice day, I'd get up out of my seat, go forward to the flight deck, and strike up a conversation with the pilot and co-pilot. Nobody thought of locking the door to the flight deck in those days. And of course, I didn't want to do this if I figured that the pilots were really busy, like lousy weather. But it was a good way of passing the time, which they seemed to enjoy, and I did. So we met in Washington, and in December we went back to Patuxent River to get married in the chapel there, and then we had then I said goodbye to Wall Street, and we had our honeymoon in the Wardman Park Hotel, and I, at the same time, was looking for a job. It seems like a terribly reckless thing to get married when you knew you were quitting a job and had not yet nailed down another one. But I was able to get a job quickly, and one of the few things that Harry Truman was able to do, especially after his amazing victory over Thomas Dewey, who, according to the polls, was going to easily beat him. I had a friend who I had met in the Navy, and after the war, he suggested that he and I go into partnership for a product that I had invented to help new pilots make trips across the country. Mapigator. What it was a adaptation of a carrier pilot's plotting board with the kind of aviation chart that small plane pilots would use.
Daddy, why don't we all raise our glasses to toast to
Because
you for the 65th anniversary.
Hey!
Here, here!
Cheers.
Hooray!
You know, you should be so proud of your parents.
Yay! Clink, clink, clink.
Congratulations.
I'll be turning this off in 2 seconds. Oh, I've got some, okay. That's great.
I shot a lot of stills, Mary.